The 2023 Country Reports on Human Rights Practices for Colombia, issued by the U.S. Department of State, is an extensive analysis of the country's human rights landscape. The report addresses a variety of serious issues, including extrajudicial killings and abuses by security forces, forced disappearances, and the persistent violence from both state and non-state actors. Among the most critical points raised are the continued challenges of impunity, inadequate investigations, and the slow judicial processes that allow many human rights violators to avoid justice. Violence remains a major concern, often exacerbated by the ongoing conflicts between government forces and illegal armed groups such as paramilitaries and guerrillas. This violence frequently targets vulnerable populations, including Afro-Colombians, indigenous communities, women, and human rights defenders. There are also extensive reports of arbitrary arrests, unlawful detentions, and the use of excessive force during protests. Impunity is a significant issue, with many perpetrators of violence and corruption operating without fear of punishment. Another crucial aspect of the report is the focus on freedom of expression and the press. While Colombia has constitutional protections for these rights, threats, intimidation, and violence against journalists and activists continue to undermine these freedoms. The report also examines the persistent inequality and discrimination faced by marginalized groups, such as indigenous peoples, Afro-Colombians, LGBTQ+ individuals, and women. These groups face systemic discrimination in areas like education, healthcare, and employment. Displaced persons and victims of the country's long-standing armed conflict also continue to face significant challenges, including lack of access to land, resources, and justice. Despite government efforts to address these issues, the report highlights the limitations of Colombia's human rights framework, particularly in the areas of corruption, insufficient institutional capacity, and weak rule of law in rural regions. Violence against human rights defenders, social leaders, and trade unionists has continued, even as Colombia attempts to implement peace agreements with guerrilla groups like the FARC. The failure to fully reintegrate former combatants and provide justice for victims has further contributed to ongoing instability. Overall, the 2023 report paints a troubling picture of Colombia's human rights environment, emphasizing the need for continued international attention and pressure to support reforms, strengthen institutions, and ensure accountability for violations. While the country has made some strides, much work remains in tackling the deep-rooted issues of inequality, corruption, and violence that continue to affect its most vulnerable citizens. For more details and specific cases, refer to the full report on the U.S. Department of State's official website here.